Hello and welcome to this session on the Sophist Philosophy. The Sophists were itinerant professional teachers and intellectuals who frequented Athens and other Greek cities in the second half of the 5th century BC. In return for a fee, the Sophists offered young wealthy Greek men an education in arete, which means virtue or excellence, thereby attaining wealth and fame while also arousing significant antipathy. Prior to the 5th century BC, arete was predominantly associated with aristocratic warrior virtues such as courage and physical strength. In democratic Athens of the later 5th century BC, however, arete was increasingly understood in terms of the ability to influence one's fellow citizens in political gatherings through the rhetorical persuasion. The sophistic education both grew out of and exploited this shift. The most famous representatives of the Sophist movements are Protagoras, Gorgias, Antiphon, Hippias, Prodicus, and Thrasymachus. This unit provides a broad overview of the Sophists and indicates some of the central philosophical issues raised by their works. The historical and philological difficulties confronting an interpretation of the Sophists are very significant. Only a handful of sophistic texts have survived, and most of what we know of the Sophists is drawn from second-hand testimony, fragments, and the generally hostile depictions of them in Plato's dialogues. The philosophical problem of the nature of sophistry is arguably even more formidable. Due in large part to the influence of Plato and Aristotle, the term sophistry has come to signify the deliberate use of fallacious reasoning, intellectual charlatanism, and moral dishonesty. It is an oversimplification to think of the historical sophists in these terms, because they made genuine and original contributions to Western thought. Plato and Aristotle nonetheless established their view of what constitutes legitimate philosophy, in part by distinguishing their own activity from the Sophists. If one is so inclined, sophistry can thus be regarded in a conceptual as well as historical sense as the other of philosophy. Perhaps because of the interpretative difficulties mentioned above, the Sophists have been many things to many people. For Hegel, the Sophists were subjectivists whose skeptical reaction to the objective dogmatism of the pre-Socratics was synthesized in the work of Plato and Aristotle. For the utilitarian English classicist George Grote, the Sophists were progressive thinkers who placed in question the prevailing morality of their time. Most recent work by French theorists such as Jacques Derrida and Jean-François Lyotard suggests affinities between the Sophists and postmodernism. The Greek word sophistis, formed from the noun sophia, which means wisdom or learning, has a general sense one who exercises wisdom or learning. As sophia could designate specific types of expertise, as well as general rationality in the conduct of life and the higher kinds of insight associated with seers and poets, the word originally meant sage or expert. In the course of the 5th century BC, the term, while retaining its original unspecific sense, came in addition to be applied specifically to a new type of intellectuals, professional educators who toured the Greek world offering instruction in a wide range of subjects with particular emphasis on skill in public speaking and the successful conduct of life. The emergence of this new profession, which was an extension to new areas of the tradition of the itinerant rhapsody, was a response to various social, economic, political, and cultural developments of the period. The increasing wealth and intellectual sophistication of Greek cities, especially Athens, created a demand for higher education beyond the traditional basic grounding in literacy, arithmetic, music, and physical training. To some extent, this involved the popularization of Ionian speculation about the physical world, which was extended into areas such as history, geography, and the origins of civilization. The increase in participatory democracy, especially in Athens, led to a demand for success in political and forensic oratory, and hence to the development of specialized techniques of persuasion and argument. Finally, the period saw the flourishing of a challenging, rationalistic climate of thought on questions including those of morality, religion, and political conduct, to which the sophists both responded and contributed. It is important to emphasize the individualistic character of the sophist profession. The practitioners belonged to no organizations, shared no common body of beliefs, and founded no schools, either in the sense of the academic institutions or in that of bodies of individuals committed to the promulgation of specific doctrines. In what follows, we shall illustrate the diversity of sophistic activities, while considering the extent to which we can nevertheless identify common themes and attitudes. The Sophists. Protagoras of Abdera was the most prominent member of the sophistic movement. Despite his animus toward the sophists, Plato depicts Protagoras as quite a sympathetic and dignified figure. One of the more intriguing aspects of Protagoras' life and work is his association with the great Athenian general and statesman Pericles. Pericles, who was the most influential statesman in Athens for more than 30 years, including the first 2 years of the Peloponnesian War, seems to have held a high regard for philosophers and sophists, and Protagoras in particular, entrusting him with the role of drafting law for the Athenian foundation city of Thurii in 444 BC. From a philosophical perspective, Protagoras is most famous for his relativistic account of truth, in particular the claim that man is a measure of all things, and his agnosticism concerning the gods. Plato suggests that Protagoras sought to differ his educational offering from that of other sophists, such as Hippias, by concentrating upon instruction in arete in the sense of political virtue, rather than specialized studies such as astronomy and mathematics. Gorgias of Leontini is generally considered as a member of the sophistic movement, despite his denial of the capacity to teach arete. The major focus of Gorgias was rhetoric, and given the importance of persuasive speaking to the sophistic education and his acceptance of fees, it is appropriate to consider him alongside other famous sophists for present purposes. Gorgias visited Athens in 427 BC as a leader of an embassy from Leontini, with the successful intention of persuading the Athenians to make an alliance with Syracuse. He traveled extensively around Greece, earning large sums of money by giving lessons in rhetoric and epidactic speeches. Gorgias' original contribution to philosophy is sometimes disputed, but the fragments of his work claim concerning the power of rhetorical speech and a style of argumentation reminiscent of Parmenides and Zeno. Gorgias is also credited with other orations and Encomia, and a technical treatise on rhetoric, which is entitled At the Right Moment in Time. Another noteworthy sophist philosopher is Antiphon. He raises a range of positions and counterpositions on the relationship between nature and convention, and is considered an important discussion in the history of political thought because of its alleged advocacy of egalitarianism. One more notable sophist philosopher is Hippias of Elis. The exact dates for Hippias of Elis are unknown. Plato presents Hippias as a comic figure who is obsessed with money, pompous and confused. Hippias is best known for his polymathy. His areas of expertise seems to have included astronomy, grammar, history, mathematics, music, poetry, prose, rhetoric, painting, and sculpture. Like Gorgias and Prodicus, he served as an ambassador for his home city. His work as a historian, which included compiling lists of Olympic victors, was invaluable to Thucydides and subsequent historians, as it allowed for a more precise dating of the past events. In mathematics, he is attributed with the discovery of a curve used to trisect an angle. In terms of his philosophical contribution, Hippias advocated a theory that classes or kinds of things are dependent on a being that traverses them. It is hard to make much sense of this alleged doctrine on the basis of available evidence. Prodicus of Ceos, who lived during roughly the same period as Protagoras and Hippias, is best known for his subtle distinction between meanings of words. He has written a treatise which is entitled On the Correctness of Names. Thrasymachus was a well-known rhetorician in Athens in the later part of the 5th century BC. The only surviving record of his views is contained in Plato's Cleitophon and Book 1 of the Republic. He is depicted as brash and aggressive with views on the nature of justice, democracy and education. The first sophists prepared Athenian males for public life in the polis by teaching them how to debate through the art of rhetoric. The art of persuasion was the most important thing to have a successful life in the 5th century Athens social commonplace, when rhetoric was its most important stage. The sophists' rhetorical techniques were extremely useful for any young nobleman looking for public office. The societal roles the sophists filled had important ramifications for the Athenian political system at large. The historical context provides evidence for their considerable influence as Athens became more and more democratic during the period in which the sophists were most active. Athens was a flourishing democracy before the sophists started their teaching there. The sophists certainly were not directly responsible for Athenian democracy, but their cultural and psychological contributions played an important role in its growth. They contributed to the new democracy in part by espousing expertise in public deliberation, since this was the foundation of decision-making, which allowed and perhaps required a tolerance of the beliefs of others. This liberal attitude would naturally have precipitated into the Athenian assembly as sophists acquired increasingly high-powered clients. Continuous rhetorical training gave the citizens of Athens the ability to create accounts of communal possibilities through persuasive speech. This was extremely important for the democracy, as it gave disparate and sometimes superficially unattractive views a chance to be heard in the Athenian assembly. In addition, sophists had great impact on the early development of law, as the sophists were the first lawyers in the world. Their status as lawyers was a result of their extremely developed argumentation skills. Sophists taught the art of speaking and writing in the Western world before any other philosophical or rhetorical figure. The sophists were notorious for their claim to teach virtue or excellence and for accepting fees for teaching. The influence of this stance is evident in education in general and medical education in particular. During the Sophistic period, the Greek discipline of rhetoric had heavy influence on Roman education. It was during this time that Latin rhetorical studies were banned for the precedent of Greek rhetorical studies. In addition, the Greek history was preferred for the education of the Roman elites above that of their native Roman history. Many rhetoricians during this period were instructed under specialists in Greek rhetorical studies as part of their standard education. Cicero, a prominent rhetorician during this period in Roman history, is one such example, the example of the influence of the second sophistic on Roman education. His early life coincided with the suppression of Latin rhetoric in Roman education under the edicts of Crassus and Domitius. Cicero was instructed in Greek rhetoric throughout his youth, as well as in other subjects of the Roman rubric under Archias. Cicero benefited in his early education from favorable ties to Crassus. In his writings, Cicero showed a synthesis that he achieved between Greek and Roman culture. Despite his oratorical skill, Cicero pressed for a more liberal education in Roman instruction, which focused more in the broad sciences, including Roman history. He entitled his set of sciences as Politeor Humanita. Regardless of his efforts towards this end, Greek history was still preferred by the majority of aristocratic Romans during this time. Major themes of Sophist philosophy: nature and convention. The distinction between physis, which means nature, and nomos, which means custom, law, or convention, was a central theme in Greek thought in the second half of the 5th century BC, and is especially important for understanding the work of the sophists. The dichotomy between physis and nomos seems to have been something of a commonplace of sophistic thought, and was appealed to by Protagoras and Hippias, among others. Perhaps the most instructive sophistic account of the distinction, however, is found in Antiphon's fragment entitled On Truth. Antiphon applies a distinction to notions of justice and injustice, arguing that the majority of things which are considered just according to nomos are in direct conflict with nature and hence not truly or naturally just. The basic thrust of Antiphon's argument is that laws and conventions are designed as a constraint upon our natural pursuit of pleasure. According to Callicles, a young Athenian aristocrat, Socrates' arguments in favor of the claim that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit injustice trade on a deliberate ambiguity in the term justice. Callicles argues that conventional justice is a kind of a slave morality imposed by the many to constrain the desires of the superior few. What is just according to nature, by contrast, is seen by observing animals in nature and relations between political communities, where it can be seen that the strong prevail over the weak. Although the sophist Thrasymachus does not employ the physis-nomos distinction in Book 1 of the Republic, his account of justice belongs within a similar conceptual framework. Like Callicles, Thrasymachus accuses Socrates of deliberate deception in his arguments, particularly in the claim the art of justice consists in a ruler looking after their subjects. According to Thrasymachus, we do better to think of the ruler-ruled relation in terms of a shepherd looking after his flock with a view to its eventual demise. Justice in conventional terms is simply a naive concern for the advantage of another. According to Protagoras' myth, man was originally set forth by the gods into a violent state of nature reminiscent of that later described by Hobbes. Our condition improved when Zeus bestowed us with shame and justice. These enabled us to develop the skills of politics and hence civilized communal relations and virtue. Apart from supporting his argument that arete can be taught, this account suggests a defense of nomos on the grounds that nature by itself is insufficient for the flourishing of man considered as a political animal. Relativism. The primary source on sophistic relativism about knowledge and or truth is Protagoras' famous statement that man is a measure of all things. Interpretation of Protagoras' thesis has always been a matter of controversy. Caution is needed in particular against the temptation to read modern epistemological concerns into Protagoras' account and sophistic teaching on the relativity of truth more generally. Protagoras' measure thesis is, a human being is a measure of all things, of those things that are, that they are, and of those things that are not, that they are not. There is near scholarly consensus that Protagoras is referring here to each human being as a measure of what is rather than humankind as such. On this reading, we can regard Protagoras as asserting that if the wind, for example, feels or seems cold to me and feels or seems warm to you, then the wind is cold for me and is warm for you. Protagoras could be asserting that 1. There is no mind-independent wind at all, but merely private subjective winds. 2. There is a wind that exists independently of my perception of it, but it is in itself neither cold nor warm, as these qualities are private. And 3. There is a wind that exists independently of my perception of it, and this is both cold and warm insofar as two qualities can inhere in the same mind-independent entity. This statement is also extended to the political and ethical realm. That is, whatever in any particular city is considered just and admirable is just and admirable in that city for so long as the convention remains in place. The other major source for sophistic relativism is Disoi Logoi, an undated and anonymous example of Protagorean antilogic. In the Disoi Logoi, we find competing arguments on 5 theses, including whether the good and the bad are the same or different, and a series of examples of relativity of different cultural practices and laws. Overall, the Disoi Logoi can be taken to uphold not only the relativity of truth, but also the variability thesis, which states that whatever is good in some qualified way is also bad in another respect, and the same is the case for a wide range of contrary predicates. Language and reality. Understandably, given their educational program, the sophists place great emphasis upon the power of speech, or logos. Logos is an extremely difficult term to translate and can refer to thought and that about which we speak and think, as well as rational speech or language. The sophists were interested in particular with the role of human discourse in shaping of reality. Rhetoric was a centerpiece of curriculum, but literary interpretation of the work of poets was also a staple of sophistic education. Zeno and Gorgias asserts that nothing exists, that if it did exist, it could not be apprehended, and if it was apprehended, it could not be articulated in logos. Even if knowledge of beings was possible, its transmission in logos would always be distorted by the rift between substances and other apprehension and communication of them. An understanding of logos about nature as constitutive rather than descriptive here supports the assertion of the omnipotence of rhetorical expertise. In the Encomium to Helen, Gorgias refers to logos as a powerful master. If humans had the knowledge of past, present, or future, they would not be compelled to adopt unpredictable opinion as their counselor. The endless contention of astronomers, politicians, and philosophers is taken to demonstrate that no logos is definitive. Let us now summarize what we have discussed so far. Sophism is an early pre-Socratic school of philosophy in ancient Greece. The term sophism comes from the Greek sophos or sophia, which means wise or wisdom, and originally refers to any expertise in a specific domain of knowledge or craft. Sophists held relativistic views on cognition and knowledge, skeptical views on truth and morality, and their philosophy often contained criticisms of religion, law, and ethics. Many sophists were just as religious as most of their contemporaries, but some held atheistic or agnostic views. Typical sophist quotations include "Man is a measure of all things" by Protagoras and "Justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger" by Thrasymachus. Sophists had considerable influence in their time and were largely well regarded. They were generally itinerant teachers who accepted fees in return for instruction in oratory and rhetoric, and they emphasized the practical application of rhetoric towards civic and political life. Their cultural and psychological contributions played an important role in the growth of democracy in Athens, not least through their rhetorical teaching, their adoption of relativism, and the liberal and pluralistic acceptance of other viewpoints. Sophists were also some of the world's first lawyers, making full use of their highly developed argumentation skill. Now, you can try to answer the questions given here. What are the influences of Sophist philosophy in the modern world of thought? Who are considered as the Sophist philosophers? Explain the educational features of Sophist philosophy. Who are the Sophists and what did they teach? Write a short note on Sophists' art of speaking and writing. What are the central themes of Sophist philosophy? Analyze the Sophist concept, "Man is a measure of all things." Now, you can go through the reference books for further reading. The Complete Works of Aristotle by J. Barnes, published by Princeton University Press. Plato, Complete Works by J. M. Cooper, published by Hackett. A History of Greek Philosophy by W. K. C. Guthrie, published by the Cambridge University Press. The Sophistic Movement by G. B. Kerford, published by the Cambridge University Press. The Cambridge Companion to Early Greek Philosophy by A. A. Long, published by Cambridge University Press. A Companion to Ancient Philosophy by Pellegrin and Gill, published by Blackwell Publishing Limited. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic soon. Have a nice day.